Charleston, South Carolina. Winter, 1828. Blood darkened the snow at the edge of the Ohio River. Seraphina Rose Pemberton knelt in it, her silk gloves ruined, her hands slick as she pressed them against Solomon's back, trying to stop what could not be stopped. The river roared beside them, black and swollen, swallowing the echoes of gunfire that still rang in her ears. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice breaking apart. "Please, you promised." Solomon lay half on his side, half in her arms, his breath shallow, each inhale a struggle carved into sound. A bullet wound burned through his back, the blood soaking through his shirt and into the frozen ground. His face was pale, his eyes unfocused, but when he looked at her, there was no fear there, only relief. "You made it," he said softly. "That's what matters." Lantern light flickered through the trees behind them. Voices shouted orders. Dogs barked, closer now. They were still being hunted, even here, even now, even as death reached for him again. Seraphina shook her head violently. "No, you don't get to leave me. Not after everything, not after all the times you saved me." She could still see them all, stacked like scars inside her mind. His hands pulling her from the water when she was a child, his arm yanking her back from a collapsing balcony, his body shielding hers from a rearing horse, a knife flashing as he killed a snake inches from her ankle, smoke and fire and his strength dragging her into air, a thief's blade stopped by his own blood, wheels screaming past as he threw her clear. 7 times, now an 8th, or the last. Solomon's fingers twitched weakly, finding her wrist. "Listen to me," he murmured. If I don't wake up, don't," she sobbed. But the world was already choosing for them, and as the shouts grew louder and the snow filled with red, Seraphina understood the terrible truth at the heart of her life. She had survived death again and again, because it had always been waiting to take him instead. Before we continue, let me ask you, where are you listening from today? Whether you're at home or on the road, I wish you a warm and joyful Christmas. Now, let's get back to the story. Charleston, South Carolina. Summer, 1827. Charleston in the summer of 1827 was a city that looked like a dream and felt like a fever. The sun rose early over the harbor and turned the water to hammered silver. By noon, heat pressed down on the cobblestones so hard that horses sweated through their harnesses and men cursed beneath their breath. The air was thick with salt, tar, and the sweet rot of marshland. In the narrow streets, the scent of jasmine from hidden courtyards mixed with the harsher smells of commerce. Fish guts, molasses, wet rope, and human bodies packed too closely together. Charleston lived by the sea, but it was ruled by what came through its docks. Ships arrived like floating fortunes. Cotton, rice, indigo, rum and sugar, timber and iron. And beneath those obvious goods, the city's true currency moved in quieter shadows, passed from hand to hand, with contracts and smiles. Enslaved people bought, sold, and counted like ledger entries. Auction notices fluttered on walls. Chains clinked in back alleys. The wealthiest churches were built with money that had never belonged to the people who earned it. On East Bay Street, where the grand houses faced the harbor like they owned the horizon, the Pemberton mansion stood with the confidence of inheritance. It was a 3-story home of pale brick and wrought iron, with tall windows that caught the wind off the water. The Pembertons were not planters, not in the romanticized way Charleston liked to tell its own story. They were maritime merchants, a family that made its fortune through shipping and trade, and they wore refinement like a uniform. Inside that mansion lived the city's favorite myth. Seraphina Rose Pemberton was 19 and famous before she had done anything except survive. She was the kind of beauty Charleston adored. Hair the color of new wheat, eyes bright as summer sky, skin pale enough to make men speak in soft voices as if her fragility were part of her charm. When she walked into a drawing room, conversation paused for a heartbeat, then resumed with a warmer tone, as if her presence improved the air. People called her an angel, They meant it as a compliment. Serafina heard it as a warning. Because her life had been a chain of near deaths, each one feeding the city's fascination, each one tightening a private terror inside her. By 19, she had learned what it meant to feel your own heart race in your throat, to see the world tilt suddenly toward disaster, to understand that survival can become its own kind of curse. Charleston whispered stories about her the way it whispered about storms and scandals. Some said she was blessed, marked by God for protection. Others said she was cursed, marked for tragedy that had not yet arrived. Women watched her with a mixture of envy and pity. Men admired her, as if her beauty was sharpened by the threat that always hovered near her. Serafina did not enjoy any of it. She lived with the sensation that death was waiting just outside the frame, patient, rehearsing. She avoided deep attachments because she believed love would only make the inevitable loss crueler. She smiled because she was taught to. She attended dinners because her parents insisted. She laughed at the right moments because Charleston demanded it. At night, she lay awake listening to the creak of the house settling, the distant clang of ship bells, and she imagined the next accident like a prayer she could not stop repeating. The Pemberton household ran smoothly, as wealthy houses did, because other people's labor absorbed every inconvenience. 36 enslaved men and women worked the kitchen, cleaned the floors, tended the horses, and carried the Pembertons' comfort on their backs. Among them was Solomon. He was 24, tall and solidly built, with shoulders shaped by years of lifting and hauling. His face carried a quiet intensity, not anger exactly, but awareness sharpened into habit. Where others moved quickly, he moved precisely. Where others dropped their gaze, his eyes tracked everything, doorways, shadows, the posture of a man's shoulders before he spoke. People in the household had different explanations for him. Some said he was lucky, that he was always in the right place at the right time. Others said he was eerie, that he could sense danger before it appeared, like a dog hearing thunder long before the clouds formed. The older women in the quarters whispered that his mother had been a healer, a woman who knew plants and fevers and the way human beings lied with their bodies. They said she taught Solomon to read signs most men ignored. Solomon never confirmed any of it. He simply watched. He watched Serafina too, though he never stared. He remembered her as a child, a small bright thing in a white dress running too close to the pond, leaning too far over balconies, reaching toward animals that should have frightened her. He remembered the first time he saved her, when he was only 9 and she was 6, and the water had swallowed her screams until he dove in after her with lungs too small for courage. He remembered the weight of her limp body in his arms. He remembered the way adults shouted afterward, not praise, not gratitude, but punishment threats, because a black boy's hands were not meant to touch a white girl even to keep her alive. That was the first scar. The others came like seasons, a rotten railing giving way beneath her feet, a horse bolting in panic, a snake coiled in tall grass, a kitchen fire leaping too quickly through dry timber, a thief's knife glittering in a dark alley, a carriage wheel turning too fast. Each time Solomon's body moved before thought finished forming. He grabbed, shoved, pulled, lifted, fought. He took hits meant for her. He risked punishment for touching her, for intervening, for acting like her life mattered more than his obedience. And each time, after the danger passed, Serafina returned to her world of lace and music and polite conversation, as if the rescue were simply part of her story, another charming proof that she was protected. She never once asked what it cost him. She never once sat with him long enough to see the bruises fading under his shirt, the cuts on his hands, the way his jaw tightened when someone joked about her luck. Solomon told himself it did not matter. Gratitude was a luxury he could not expect, but there was truth he could not escape. He did not keep saving her because he was ordered to. He kept saving her because every time he saw death reaching for her, something inside him rose up, fierce and helpless, and refused to let it take her. Charleston would have called that devotion. Charleston would have punished it as arrogance. And Serafina trapped inside her own fear, did not yet understand that the true curse on her life was not the accidents. It was the man the accidents were slowly teaching her to need. Charleston, South Carolina, September 1827. The proposal arrived dressed as security. Captain Nathaniel Blackwell came to the Pemberton house in a navy coat cut sharp enough to suggest discipline and wealth. He spoke softly, smiled rarely, and carried himself like a man accustomed to obedience. Charleston approved of him immediately, a successful sea captain, a respectable fortune, a solution. Serafina felt dread coil in her stomach the moment he bowed over her hand. His fingers lingered a second too long. His eyes did not soften when he smiled. When he spoke of marriage, he spoke of order, of a wife who would be protected, of a household that would not invite chaos. "You have had enough excitement for one lifetime," Blackwell said calmly. "I can give you peace." Serafina heard the unspoken words beneath it: control, silence, endurance. That night, the house felt tighter around her, as if the walls had moved closer. She could not sleep. The city's heat pressed against her skin, and the memory of Blackwell's hand would not leave her thoughts. She rose and stepped onto the second-floor balcony, craving air, distance, anything that might quiet her racing heart. The wood beneath her feet creaked. She took one more step. The railing gave way without warning. For a fraction of a second, the world inverted. The lights below rushed upward. Serafina screamed as her body pitched forward into open space. Solomon heard it before anyone else. He had been making his rounds in the courtyard, senses alert in the way they always were when the night felt wrong. The scream cut through him like a blade. He looked up just in time to see her falling. He ran. There was no time to calculate, no time to think about punishment or consequences. He launched himself forward, arms outstretched, catching Serafina mid-fall. The force drove them both into the stone walkway. Her body landed across his chest. Her head missed the ground. His did not. The impact rang through him. White pain exploded behind his eyes. He felt the sharp crack of bone against stone, tasted blood, and then the world dimmed. Serafina lay frozen atop him, stunned by survival yet again. Then she saw the blood spreading beneath his head, dark and fast. "Solomon," she whispered. He did not answer. Panic seized her. For the first time in her life, death had not brushed past her. It had stopped at someone else instead. "Help!" she screamed, louder than she ever had. "Someone help us!" Servants came running. Lanterns flared. Voices overlapped in confusion. Someone pulled her away gently, but she fought them, reaching back toward Solomon as if proximity alone might keep him alive. A doctor was summoned, grumbling as he arrived, already irritated by the hour. He took one look at Solomon and shook his head. "Head injury. Bad one. He's a slave. Best not to waste." "Save him," Serafina said. The command cut through the courtyard. Everyone turned. "I will pay," she continued, her voice shaking but firm. "I will pay anything. If he dies, it will be because you chose to let him." Silence followed. The doctor hesitated, then knelt. Solomon lingered between worlds for 3 days. Serafina refused to leave his side. She sat in the dim infirmary by the stables, holding his hand, wiping blood from his hair, listening to his uneven breathing. She slept in a chair. She prayed until the words ran out, and only pleading remained. For the first time, she counted the rescues not as stories, not as miracles, but as debts written into flesh. On the 4th morning, Solomon's eyes opened. He focused slowly, confusion giving way to recognition. When he saw Serafina, exhausted, tear-streaked, still there, his brow creased. "Miss," he whispered. Her breath broke. She pressed his hand to her cheek, unashamed of the tears that fell freely now. "You saved me again," she said. "And this time, you almost died." He swallowed, voice weak but honest. "I would have." he said quietly. If that's what it took.
Why?
She asked, her voice barely holding together. Why have you done this so many times? Solomon closed his eyes for a long moment, as if the truth weighed too much for a body still healing. Because I love you, he said at last. I always have. The words changed everything. Seraphina stood as if struck. In that instant, all her fear aligned into clarity. The accidents, the rescues, the terror of loving anyone because death always followed. It had never been chasing her, it had been circling him, and now she understood the cruelest truth of all. She loved him too. Charleston, South Carolina, autumn 1827. Love did not arrive like a confession, it arrived like fear. After Solomon spoke the words aloud, Seraphina fled the infirmary as if the air itself had turned dangerous. She walked the length of the Pemberton courtyard without realizing where she was going, her breath shallow, her hands trembling inside her gloves. Because loving Solomon meant everything she had spent her life avoiding had finally found her. Death, loss, ruin. She had learned young that survival came with a price. Every near escape carved another notch into her nerves. She smiled. She obeyed. She kept her heart carefully distant because distance felt like safety. And now the man who had saved her life again and again had placed his heart in her hands. She could not carry that weight. For days, she did not return to the stables. She sent word that Solomon was to be given light duties during recovery. She paid the doctor without comment. She avoided balconies, horses, crowds. She avoided everything that reminded her of him. Solomon understood her absence better than she knew. He lay awake at night, pain pulsing through his skull, staring at the low wooden beams above his cot. He replayed the moment again and again, wishing he could take the words back, wishing he could protect her from the truth the way he had protected her from falling bodies and blades. He had not meant to burden her. He had only meant to be honest before death stole the chance. When he returned to work, Charleston returned with him. Orders, silence, distance. The old rules settled back into place like a chain being gently but firmly locked. And yet the bond they had named could not be unmade. They began to encounter each other in quiet, accidental ways. A pause too long in the hallway. A glance held a heartbeat longer than propriety allowed. A shared look when Captain Blackwell's name was spoken, heavy with dread and recognition. Seraphina tried to convince herself that gratitude had masqueraded as love. That fear had sharpened emotion into something false. She prayed for clarity and received none. What she received instead was memory. She remembered the pond, cold and choking, and Solomon's arms around her. She remembered the horse's hooves striking inches from her skull. She remembered smoke in her lungs and his strength dragging her into air. She remembered the way he never looked at her like a fragile ornament or a cursed curiosity. He looked at her like someone who mattered. One evening, unable to bear the distance any longer, Seraphina returned to the stables. Solomon was alone, cleaning tack with careful movements, his head still bandaged. He froze when he saw her, then lowered his gaze immediately. "Miss," he said. "I'm not here as your mistress," she said quickly. "I'm here because I owe you an apology." He frowned slightly. "You don't owe me anything." "I owe you everything," she replied, "and I ran from you when you told me the truth." He swallowed. "I shouldn't have said it." "No," she said softly. "You should have. I just wasn't ready to hear it." They stood in the dim space, the smell of leather and hay surrounding them, the air thick with words neither dared say next. "I'm afraid," Seraphina admitted. "I have spent my whole life waiting for death. Loving you feels like inviting it closer." Solomon finally looked at her then, his eyes steady despite the pain etched into his face. "I've been living with death my whole life," he said. "It's never stopped me from choosing what's right." She shook her head. "This isn't right. It's forbidden. If anyone knew, they'd destroy us," he finished. "I know." Silence fell again. But this time it did not push them apart.
I don't want you to die for me anymore, she whispered. I can't live with that.
Solomon's voice was gentle but unyielding. I don't choose danger because of you. I choose you because you are worth danger. The words settled into her bones like truth. From that night forward, they stopped pretending nothing existed. They did not touch. They did not meet in secret rooms or stolen hours. Their love unfolded in restraint, in conversation carefully chosen, in moments guarded as fiercely as any physical boundary. They spoke when they could, briefly and cautiously. Seraphina told Solomon about her nightmares, about waking convinced she was falling again. Solomon told her about his mother, about how she taught him to watch the world because the world did not forgive inattention. They spoke of faith, of whether God punished love or cruelty more harshly. I don't believe God would condemn love, Seraphina said once, but I know men will. Solomon nodded. Men write laws. God watches what they do with them. Each day, Captain Blackwell's shadow grew longer. He visited often, his presence tightening the house like a fist. He spoke to Seraphina of obedience, of how a woman's fear could be corrected with structure. He spoke openly about discipline, smiling when her hand trembled in his. Solomon watched from a distance, helpless fury burning in his chest. One afternoon, Blackwell noticed. He saw the way Solomon's attention sharpened whenever Seraphina entered a room. He saw the way Seraphina's posture changed, subtly but unmistakably, when Solomon was nearby. Predators recognized bonds quickly. That evening, Solomon was summoned and beaten again, this time without explanation. Seraphina heard his cry from her window. Something inside her finally broke. She went to her father that night, shaking but resolved. I will not marry Blackwell, she said. I would rather die. Her father's expression hardened. You will do as you are told. No, she replied, surprising even herself. I have lived in fear long enough. You are being foolish, he snapped. You owe this family security. I owe myself a life, she said. The next day, Blackwell's temper erupted. He ordered Solomon chained and threatened sail to the Caribbean, where men worked until they did not return. Seraphina stood between them. If you touch him, she said, her voice ice-cold, I will make certain every man in Charleston knows what you do to women and sailors alike. Blackwell laughed. You think anyone will listen to you? She met his gaze without flinching. They will, because I am done being afraid. That night, Solomon and Seraphina met in the garden where so many rescues had begun. We can't stay, Seraphina said. Not after this. Solomon nodded. I've known that since the balcony. They stood close for the first time, not touching, but no longer denying the gravity between them. How many times have you saved me? She asked quietly. He thought for a moment. Enough to know I'd do it again. She reached for his hand then, finally, deliberately. And this time, she said, we save each other. Beyond the garden walls, Charleston slept, unaware that two people it believed it owned were preparing to defy it. The noose was tightening, and love, once awakened, refused to lie down quietly. Charleston, South Carolina, October 1827. The city began to close in. Charleston had always watched Seraphina with fascination, but now its gaze sharpened into something colder, more deliberate. Invitations arrived more frequently. Walks were accompanied. Servants were questioned. Captain Blackwell's presence became constant, his shadow stretching across the Pemberton house like a warning. He had sensed resistance, and resistance offended him. You are nervous, he remarked one afternoon as they sat in the parlor, his gloved hand resting possessively on the arm of his chair. Marriage will cure that. Seraphina forced herself to meet his eyes. Marriage to the wrong man is not a cure. It is a disease. Blackwell smiled thinly. Careful, Miss Pemberton. Women are often mistaken for being stronger than they are. That evening, Solomon was removed from his usual duties. Without explanation, he was reassigned to night labor at the docks, the most dangerous work Charleston had to offer. Ships unloaded through the dark hours, ropes snapping, crates swinging overhead, men crushed or swept into the harbor with alarming regularity. It was punishment disguised as necessity. Serafina understood immediately. Blackwell was not trying to kill Solomon outright, he was letting the city do it for him. She confronted her father, her voice shaking with restrained fury. "You know what he's doing." Her father would not meet her eyes. "Blackwell is ensuring order. You are encouraging chaos." "That chaos is my life," she replied, "and I will not sacrifice another person to preserve your comfort." Her father's silence was an answer. From that moment on, Serafina began to plan. She counted her jewels. She memorized schedules. She listened at doors she had once been too polite to approach. She wrote letters she never sent, then burned them. Every night, she lay awake imagining Solomon crushed beneath a crate, dragged underwater, or chained and shipped south. Solomon, meanwhile, felt the pressure closing around him like a tightening fist. At the docks, he worked among men who did not expect to live long. He watched ropes, read tides, anticipated accidents before they happened. Twice in 1 week, he pulled other men out of harm's way, earning muttered gratitude and wary respect. But each night, he returned to his quarters more bruised, more exhausted. He knew this was not coincidence. Blackwell visited the docks one night, immaculate even in the grime, his eyes scanning the workers until they landed on Solomon. "You have a habit of surviving," Blackwell said mildly. "That habit can be corrected." Solomon did not reply. "You should be grateful," Blackwell continued. "I could sell you tomorrow. The islands are always in need of strong backs." Solomon lifted his gaze then, steady and unafraid. "You could," he said, "but you haven't yet." Blackwell's smile vanished. The threat arrived 2 days later. A notice was delivered to the Pemberton house. Solomon was to be sold at auction within the week, destination unspecified. Officially, it was to cover debts. Unofficially, it was a message. Serafina felt the room tilt when she read it. This was the crisis she had always feared. Not death rushing suddenly, but loss arriving with paperwork and smiles. She went to Solomon that night, ignoring servants, ignoring risk, her heart pounding with a clarity she had never known. "They're selling you," she said breathless. "If they do, I'll never see you again." Solomon's face hardened, not with fear but resolve. "Then we don't let it happen." "They'll hunt us," she whispered. "They'll ruin my family." "They already are," he replied gently. "And families recover from ruin. People don't recover from chains." Serafina swallowed hard. "I don't know how to be brave the way you are." Solomon took her hands, his touch steady, grounding. "You've been brave your whole life. You just didn't know it yet." They spoke quickly, urgently. Routes north, money hidden in false bottom drawers, a small boat that serviced ships after midnight. Solomon's knowledge of tides and patrol schedules. Everything felt impossibly fragile, but it was all they had. That night, as Serafina returned to the house, she passed Captain Blackwell in the hall. He looked at her for a long moment, then spoke softly. "You are running out of choices." She stopped, turned, and met his gaze without flinching. "So are you." His eyes narrowed. "If you disgrace yourself, no one will save you." She thought of Solomon's scars, of his blood on stone, of his quiet certainty. "I am done waiting to be saved," she said. Blackwell laughed once, sharply. "Then you will learn what happens to women who mistake defiance for freedom." The sale was scheduled for dawn. That gave them 1 night. As darkness fell over Charleston, Serafina packed only what she could carry. She left behind silk and silver, portraits and letters. She dressed plainly, cutting her hair shorter than fashion allowed, her hands steady despite the weight of what she was abandoning. In the quarters, Solomon waited. When she arrived, breathless and pale, he took her face in his hands. "This is your last chance to turn back." She shook her head. "I have survived too many times to let fear decide for me now." Outside, the city slept, confident in its power. By morning, it would wake to find that something it believed it owned had chosen to escape. Charleston to the Ohio River, October 1827. They left Charleston under a moon thin as a blade. The small boat slipped from its moor with barely a sound, Solomon's hands steady on the oars as the harbor breathed around them. The water carried whispers of rope and hull in distant voices, but no alarm followed. For a brief, treacherous moment, Serafina allowed herself to believe that escape could be quiet. It could not. By the time they reached open water, wind rose without warning. The tide shifted, turning the boat sideways. A wave struck the bow hard enough to throw Serafina against the gunwale. Solomon caught her by the waist and held fast, bracing as the mast groaned. "Down," he ordered, voice sharp with urgency. The sail tore. Canvas snapped like bone. Another wave slammed them, and the boat pitched violently. Serafina clutched the bench, the old terror clawing up her throat. She had fallen before. She had drowned before. The past surged with the water. Solomon cut the remaining sail free and fought the oars with raw strength, angling the boat toward a darker line that promised shore. The storm broke them open and then, just as suddenly, released them. They grounded hard in mud and reeds, breathless, soaked, alive. They did not rest. At dawn, dogs bayed behind them. The hunters came as Solomon had warned they would, men who read trails like scripture and took pride in the chase. Solomon pulled Serafina into the trees, his pace relentless, his body shielding hers when branches snapped back and thorns tore skin. A shot cracked the air. Bark exploded inches from Solomon's head. They ran until Serafina's legs gave out. "I can't," she gasped. Solomon lifted her without a word. He carried her through swamp and brush, his breath ragged, the muscles of his back screaming. When they reached higher ground, he set her down and turned to face the men closing in. Steel flashed, a blade slashed his shoulder. Solomon struck back with the butt of a fallen branch, driving it into a man's ribs. Another lunged. Solomon caught the wrist, twisted, and the knife fell. He took a blow to the head that sent stars across his vision, but did not drop him. They escaped by inches. The days blurred into flight. Hunger gnawed. Sleep came in stolen scraps. Once, a snake struck at Serafina's ankle from tall grass, and Solomon killed it barehanded, teeth bared, blood slicking his fingers. Another night, Serafina burned with fever, her skin too hot beneath his palms. He carried her through cold rain, whispering her name like a prayer, refusing to set her down even when his legs buckled. When they reached the river, it was swollen and merciless. The Ohio ran dark and fast, the far bank a promise cut sharp by distance. Lanterns bobbed behind them, the hunters shouted, dogs strained at leads, howling for release. "Jump," Solomon said. Serafina shook her head, tears streaking her face. "Together," the gunshot split the night. The bullet tore through Solomon's back. He staggered, but did not fall. He seized Serafina's hand and leapt. The water stole their breath. Current dragged them under. Serafina thrashed, panic breaking loose, but Solomon held her, guiding her strokes, pushing when her strength failed. Another shot struck water close enough to spray their faces. They reached the far bank by instinct and pain. Solomon collapsed first. Blood soaked the leaves beneath him. His breath came shallow, a terrible, fragile sound. Serafina pressed her hands against his wound, sobbing as the red kept coming. "Stay," she begged. "Stay with me." He smiled faintly. "You're free." "No," she said fiercely. "We are." Voices approached again, closer now, and then stopped. A lantern lifted. A man's voice spoke gently, incredulous. "My God." Quakers emerged from the trees, drawn by the shots, by the river's cry. They moved quickly, practiced, hands firm and calm. Solomon was lifted, bound, carried. Serafina followed, numb with terror and relief tangled together. They reached a farmhouse before dawn. A doctor worked without complaint, without question. He stitched and cleaned and packed the wound, his hands steady. When it was done, Solomon still breathed. Serafina sat by his bed as the light grew, holding his hand the way he had held her so many times before. She counted his breaths. She counted the scars she knew by heart. When Solomon finally opened his eyes, the room swam into focus. Serafina leaned close, her face streaked and resolute. "You saved me," she said. He swallowed. "You saved me back." Outside, the world continued without them. Charleston would rage, Blackwell would curse, papers would be written and burned, but the river had carried them across a line that could not be erased. They had chosen each other, and death, for once, had been refused. Pennsylvania and beyond, 1828, 1879. Freedom did not arrive as a celebration. It arrived as quiet. In the days after the river, Serafina learned how silence could heal instead of threaten. The Quaker farmhouse smelled of clean linen and bread. No one asked for explanations that demanded confession. No one measured her worth by her beauty or her fear. They tended Solomon with the same care they would have given any wounded man, and that simple equality felt like a miracle she had never dared imagine. Solomon lived. The bullet had missed his spine by a fraction, a distance so small it terrified her to name it. He healed slowly, stubbornly, scars stitching themselves into a map she would one day trace with her fingertips. Each mark told a story of refusal, of a body that would not surrender, of love that would not step aside. They married in February of 1828 in a meeting house with bare benches and winter light pouring through plain windows. There were no rings, no grand declarations. When they stood together, hands joined, Serafina felt something steadier than joy settle into her bones. Safety chosen and earned. Life asked for work, and they gave it. Solomon became a blacksmith, shaping iron with patience learned from survival. Serafina taught letters and numbers, first to children, then to adults who came after long days with hands still rough from labor. She learned to sleep without listening for disaster. He learned to wake without scanning every shadow. They argued sometimes, about money, about scars that still ached, about how the past could reach out without warning. On those nights, they told the truth aloud. They counted what they had lived through and what they had saved in each other. In 1830, a daughter was born. They named her Salvation. In 1832, a son followed, Solomon Justice. The children grew among stories that did not glorify fear. They learned that courage could be quiet, that love could be disciplined, that a body was not a prophecy of doom. Serafina wrote when the house slept. She wrote about accidents that taught a woman to flinch, about a man who learned the language of danger so well he could interrupt it, about how survival, repeated enough times, can become a kind of loneliness until someone shares it. Solomon read everything she wrote. He never asked her to soften the truth. When Solomon died in 1879, Serafina sat with him until the end, her hand steady in his. She did not beg this time. She did not count breaths. She knew what they had been given. "You saved me," she said. He smiled, the same gentle certainty she had trusted her life to. "We saved each other." They buried him beneath a simple stone. When Serafina joined him years later, the words carved there told no lies. He saved her 15 times from death. She saved him once from a life without love. Together, they learned that scars can be a language, and love can be stronger than fate. The story is over, but the pain of that era still resonates. How are you feeling right now? Are you listening to this story alone or with someone? Share your feelings and where you are right now.